Brian and Larry in the saddle, by the way. Joining us now, Tucker Carlson, editor of the Daily Caller, co-host of Fox and Friends Weekend. We got stuff to talk about in this 2016 race. Tucker, how are you?
Good morning, gentlemen.
All right, so let me start out. There has been a suggestion by some that what might be needed is a third-party candidacy. Bill Kristol is said to be, looking around to find somebody to run as a third-party candidate in this particular race. And then apparently there was a meeting, one hears, between Bill Kristol and one Mitt Romney. Do you think that a third-party candidacy is likely to arise given this environment right now?
I think there's a lot of discontent, obviously, in Washington with Trump, a lot of horror, and a lot of legitimate disagreement. But what would a third-party Republican candidate run on against Trump? Open borders, more globalization, more pointless foreign wars, keeping carried interest in the tax code. I mean, what's the platform?
Yeah.
Presumably the idea is to get a more reasonable candidate with greater self-control, and that's fine. But ideologically, it's hard to know what they would run on, since Trump actually does represent, in his nationalism, a lot of Republican voters, probably the majority of Republican voters.
Well, doesn't that assume that people vote based on issues, when a lot of people vote on likability?
I think actually in Trump, they're not voting on likability there, and they're not voting, strictly speaking, on issues. I don't think anyone knows or cares what his view of the law of the sea treaty is. But they're voting on the perception that, first of all, he kind of cares about the middle class, and that's something you can't say about the Republican Party in Washington. They really don't care. And that he is unapologetically on the side of America and on their side. So, those are issues, but they're really broad themes. Look, Trump wouldn't exist and shouldn't exist in a normal world if the Republicans in Washington had been doing their job. For 40 years, they've taken billions in dollars of contributions the nonprofit sector has on the promise they're going to make America more conservative, more market-oriented, freer, and none of that has happened. They've failed. So, this is not an endorsement of Trump, who is a crude solution to a real problem, however. And I'm just struck by the fact that nobody in D.C. has spent 10 seconds thinking about how this happened and how maybe they should change their views or moderate their views, or at least present their views differently in order to appeal to the voters who support Trump, which, again, is probably the majority of the party.
And Tucker, what strikes me is there's this level of hubris that Trump and the people, even more importantly, the millions of people who have voted for Trump in this primary process, need to some way apologize for who they are and what they believe, and genuflect to Republicans who know better than them, given the fact that since 1988, only one president has won the popular vote with a Republican name, or with an R after his name, and that was George W. Bush in 2004. It's not like the smart guys in this town have such a great track record of winning elections.
No, that is absolutely 100% right. And this is the problem with framing a political contest as a moral referendum, and that's exactly what Republicans and Democrats have done about Trump. So supporting Trump is not just an expression that you disagree with me. It's an expression of your commitment to, the Nazi Party.
Right.
You're a collaborator with fascism. You're a Vichy Republican. They're saying this out loud.
Oh, yes.
Once you say that out loud, it becomes impossible to make any accommodation with people you disagree with, because it's not, you know what I mean? You're not just changing your views. You're admitting that you're a bad person. And that's why Paul Ryan, rather than calling Trump and saying, look, you got to tone it down or stop tweeting, or you got to change on trade, or, real issues, I think, he instead books an interview with Jake Tapper to basically tell the world, I'm a better person than Donald Trump. God favors me over Donald Trump. He's immoral, I'm moral. It really was about his personal moral vanity. And that just doesn't get you very far in politics, in addition to being pretty grating, pretty annoying.
Well, how do you think that's going to be resolved? They're supposed to meet on Thursday. Donald is going into that meeting saying, if I get unity, that's great. If I don't get unity, it's fine too.
Well, Trump is saying that because he has to. He has no choice. He's not in control. I think there are definitely things Trump could do to win over more Republicans. Stop with these ludicrous tweets, stop rising to every bait, stop picking fights or joining in fights that are beneath you, stop punching down, stop engaging with, Lindsey Graham. Who cares what Lindsey Graham thinks? Nobody does. There are things he could do for sure. But in the end, it's the responsibility of the people who lead the party to look at the voters and say, are we representing you with any degree of accuracy? Are we speaking for you, or aren't we? And they're not. But again, there's been no reflection. The one thing about Washington I've learned in 30 years here is no learning is allowed. You can make a mistake, but you're definitely not allowed to draw conclusions from that mistake.
That said, though, I mean, Tucker, you have the opportunity on Fox News weekends to be able to. You've interviewed Donald Trump. Usually those telephone interviews,
many times.
Yeah, and it is interesting to me, though, and again, I'm trying to stay as objective as possible and sort of criticize when it deserves criticism and praise when it deserves praise. For Donald Trump to spend the last several days after locking up the nomination sort of courting Bernie Sanders type voters, over his trade policies, over minimum wage, over taxation of the wealthy, rather than, at least throwing a bone to Republicans who may not have voted for him. That's a little troubling, too. Doesn't he need to meet a little halfway here?
Well, it's a little stupid because in the end, Republicans are probably more flexible than Democrats are. Democrats tend to be pretty partisan because the point of the Democratic Party is to acquire and wield power. It's not an ideological party. It's a practical party that wants to have as much control as possible. And so in the end, all Bernie Sanders voters, most of them anyway, are going to vote for Hillary just because, she's a Democrat.
That's their best shot at power, yeah.
The way they think. I think Trump should make a clearly articulated case for why his ideas represent the majority of Republicans. This nationalism, America first. And don't be ashamed of that. Most people aren't. There's nothing wrong with saying, all of our decisions as a government ought to be filtered through a single question. Is it good for us? People support that. So the more Trump says that, I think the more his support grows. Again, fighting with Lindsey Graham is insane. Why would you do that? Not one person cared. If there's ever been a member of the Senate who's been thoroughly discredited on the issues, it's Lindsey Graham. So why fight with him? Who cares?
Very quickly, Trump's been going after Bill Clinton and his past affairs and saying that Hillary was an enabler. Is this a winning strategy for him?
You can argue about whether he's saying this too soon. You can't argue about whether it's true. I don't want to judge Hillary Clinton's marriage. I try not to judge marriages. They're complicated. But if you're married to Bill Clinton, the one thing you can't do is play the woman card with me. You can't pose as a feminist or a defender of women if you're married to a guy who was a serial abuser of them, and if you were complicit in that abuse, if you attacked the women who accused him of abusing them, you can't be the arch feminist at that point. And so it's a totally fair line of attack. And by the way, why aren't all Republicans saying that? Because they're cowards, that's why.
Well said, Tucker Carlson. On point today on Mornings on the Mall. Always good to have you, Tucker.
Tucker, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Wait, considering his schedule there, having to go to New York and doing the early morning weekends.
Busy man. He's got the Fox and Friends.
Cracking the whip at Daily Caller.
Got the Daily Caller and taking time out of that busy schedule to be with you and I.
Well, that I can understand because, let's face it.
This is where Washington comes to talk.
But to be so sharp and on point, he is a phenomenal human being.
And
in
a
that
snappy
Tucker.
dresser.